So, I'm Serge Beaumont, and I'd like to talk about a kickstart that we've done of 5 teams at the same time at a DIY retailer. And as you can see on this slide, it's a 5 to 10 times reduction in time to market, which sounds amazing. But what I'd really like to share with you is that it's actually pretty simple to do, and you can do very simple things for amazing results. So let's talk about the context. So this DIY franchise is one of the largest Dutch DIY franchises. And so they're in this retail format, and the organization we were working for is actually that mother franchise organization. So they had a centralized e-commerce department. So they had the brick and mortar shops, but the e-commerce was all centralized into a central web shop, an inspirational website going with it. So they had e-commerce operations for the fulfillment, and they also had a mobile app. And that was all like one e-commerce operation. And at that time, they were approximately 5% of the total revenue. Since then, this has gone up to about 15 to 20%. And it really was a waterfall process. So previous attempts at Scrum had failed and failed badly, so there was also quite a lot of skepticism around the process. So if you kind of assess this against the Scrum at scale components, there was one big advantage, and this is also very important. There was a new e-commerce director. She had had experience with Agile. She had a vision, so she was a strong leader who knew what she wanted, and she also knew what Agile was. So she brought us on board. And at that time, there was no Agile or Scrum implemented, so basically all the other things were not there. They had a reasonable release going on, backlog prioritization somewhat, in the sense of having a change board, but that was really all. So what were the problems? The problems that they had was from the very, very shortest and smallest thing that they had to implement took them 3 months. Like very small change, even if it was a bit of text. Until the longest projects, which would take at least a year, and maybe even longer sometimes. But it meant that basically for the purposes of the customers, the business, they felt everything was standing still. And it also was done to this waterfall process with interaction designers first doing the interaction design, then the visual designers would start, then the functional designers would start. So you can imagine that was also a process that could take months and months. Then a project manager would take over. Okay, now we're going to implement it, fight a lot over the resources. Finally, the development team would get going, and they would not get what they wanted, because by that time, things would have changed. It would be different, so that also didn't work. And since it was a big bang delivery, there was no such thing as a small delivery of a bit of value. It was all or nothing. So it was a whole lot of nothing, and then a whole lot of something, but it didn't really add up to anything. So what did we do? So the first thing we did was cut all those functional silos into these cross-autonomous teams, cross-functional teams, autonomous teams, with business alignment. Now, autonomous is really important here, because that's the way you scale while you keep the complexity low. So for instance, in this case, purchasing and ordering, and inspiration and orientation. Inspiration and orientation is everything up until the basket, right? You inspire people and you search and you look at cool things. Hopefully they put a lot of stuff in their basket. And finally, from that point on, you purchase it, you order it, and the fulfillment after it is another team. Those are 2 very distinct processes. They can be dealt with autonomously, so that's what you split up into teams. So that's the way we looked at these things. So that's the first thing we did. The second thing we did was train everybody, so that everybody had this baseline, know what's going on, so you can get them going quickly. And then for each team, we made sure that they knew their purpose and their scope, and that's an important one, because the scope really made sure that these autonomous functionalities basically were aligned with each other, and there were no gaps or overlaps, so that was clean. And of course, each of them had their own definition of done, so we would know when it would be done. And then we created an initial product backlog for those 2 initial sprints just to get them going. And we did that by chopping up their current work. So the current waterfall projects they were working on, we just looked at that, changed that into a product backlog format, and this whole process took about a month for the preparation, the training, and the creation of the backlogs. And finally, we created a portfolio, and I'll show that next. And then we just planned all the synchronized events. So we basically made sure we planned everybody's planning meetings and the stand-ups and the retros so that they would all be synchronized, and then we turned on the machine. We just went with it. So this portfolio wall was a crucial thing, and now here is a schematic of it, but it really was a simple wall of stickies. It was not more than this. So this is, because that's being anonymized, it's in this format, but you can kind of see in the colors, that's the way it looked. So the yellow ones could be one project, and it would be synchronized across the teams, and then the blue project would come along, and then the teams would have to synchronize and make sure it was done at the same time. And maybe the red project would come along at some point, and then the availability and delivery team here would, they couldn't start on the green one until red was done, etc. So that synchronization was a crucial thing. And this effectively, around this wall of stickies, was what the Meta Scrum was. This is just all the product owners together with the director talking about these things. And we planned about 6 sprints ahead, which was for their purposes more than enough. So what did we end up with? So we implemented basically the whole components of Scrum at Scale, but in a simple fashion. For instance, the executive action team was effectively the e-commerce director together with the product owners, with the Scrum masters, and figuring out what needs to be done. The Meta Scrum was again the e-commerce director giving a sense of vision, and together with all the product owners to figure out what to do. So we had these 5 cross-functional Scrum teams running 2 synchronous 2-week sprints. The Scale daily Scrum was effectively a weekly one, because the cycle time of improvement, it turned out to be weekly. And the portfolio meetings were about bi-weekly, so they were in the same rhythm as the sprints themselves. So everything in the end got implemented, and the product and release feedback process, that was still a bit slow. We had to fix a lot of stuff there, but that was fixed later. So why did it work? It was a question of working smarter, not faster. These teams didn't go faster. What we did was create a lot of smaller units of delivery, so useful stuff started coming out. So to the perception of the customers and the brands, the teams were faster because stuff started coming out. That was already valuable. Because we switched on the machine 5 times at the same time, there was no friction because the way of working was the same. So there wasn't a problem there. There was friction with the outside world, but because the director made sure to compartmentalize these teams in a good way, there was very little friction with the outside world. And you might imagine, with all the process overhead I showed you, with all those designs being done before, there was a massive reduction in process overhead. So that really was nice to see. And what I also really liked, and I see it over and over again, is that a simple wall of stickies is all you really need to synchronize. You don't need to do difficult stuff, you don't need tools. You can make full year plannings for a big organization, and it just works. And finally, this director. Clear and compelling vision. She knew what she wanted, so the moment there was a thing where the teams had to go in a certain direction, she could guide them and go like, okay, that's the direction we're going, which was really powerful. So in the end, those 3 to 12 months to market were cut down to 1 to 6 weeks for any feature that they wanted. There was alignment, especially because of the short time between when you ask it and when you deliver it. There was alignment between what was expected and what was delivered. That worked really well. And finally, because of those smaller chunks, the delivery of value was a lot earlier. So it wasn't the big bang, but it just jumped up very soon. And even in many cases, we could chop off the tail and go like, well, let's not deliver that because that's not going to deliver many value, and let's start with something new. So that's what we did. That's my story. Any questions?
So I was interested to hear that the Scale Daily Scrum didn't occur daily. Do you think you lost anything from that, or what's your takeaway? Do you think they'll be moving towards a daily?
That actually was because I couldn't get their commitment to do it, and they didn't really change very much. So they were like standing there going, yeah, there's not really a problem, not really a problem, but I couldn't really motivate them to get there. So one of the evil things I did was actually to make it, slow it down, and at some point I even stopped it. So like, okay, if apparently you don't need it, then let's not do it at all. And of course, problems starting to surface. So at that point, they did see, oh, well, actually this meeting is useful and we should be talking, and then they started back up again. But in the end, for them, a weekly meeting, figuring out what the impediments are, and can we work together, and what do we need to coordinate, it worked well for them. And the second thing, because the teams had good autonomy, they didn't need to talk every day. That also was a part of it.